So in this video, I'm going to point to something that can clarify your experience when you're sitting in pure consciousness or sitting in the thought gate without grabbing, believing, wrestling with thoughts. This also might feel like a pure sense of I, pure sense of being, not contingent upon thoughts. This pure sense of being doesn't come and go, but everything comes and goes within it. All thoughts, modifications, beliefs, even identities are simply fluctuations in this pure sense of being. So there's a very subtle attunement or something I can point to that can help to clarify this. But if it sounds too technical or you find yourself overthinking it with what I'm going to say, then just disregard it. Come back another time. But if you can find this in your experience, you might notice the clarity increasing or the thoroughness of that pure sense of being clarifying. Actually, this pointing comes from a conversation I was having with one of the commenters, and it points to some important distinctions. So when you're sitting in and with this pure sense of being might also be experienced as a pure sense of knowing, but not in the usual sense of the word knowing, because it's not knowing of information. It's not even knowing of something apart from the knower. It's knowingness, or knower, knowledge, knowing, known, all as one continuum. So if you're meditating this way, just resting in this experience, perhaps noticing a thought occasionally, but when this pure knowingness or this pure conscious space is inhabited with alertness and with a full willingness to experience all movements of consciousness, then thoughts often don't really form, or they may form in very subtle ways and they're immediately relaxed back into the purity of being. Something like the wave immediately subsiding back into the ocean. So in this space, a question can arise. Should I close the sense gates and just focus attention here, purely in this being, purely in this light of knowing, or this pure sense of I? Or should I allow attention to drift into the sense gates, sounds, sensations, even the visual experience? If your eyes are closed, you might notice the soft forms behind the eyelids, or a smell, or even a taste. So if you're resting in this space, there's no right or wrong. You may just find yourself fully immersed in this beingness without really noticing the senses, or as if they're in the periphery somewhere, but they're not distracting. Or you may notice, as things just get very neutral, quiet, relaxed, attention naturally drifts into the sense fields. Either way is fine. There's no right answer. However, at some point, you'll notice that even the seeming choice for attention to be in the thought space or the conscious space, or the being space, versus the sense space, is itself a thought. If the thought forms, well, where should I put my attention now? You can notice that's a thought. So then it's very strange, because it's like, without even thinking, it seems I can encourage attention to remain in that thought space, that conscious space, even without thoughts. or gently drift attention into one of the senses. This may be without any thought, or may be a very subtle thought. But the question still arises: which way is proper? So, in the end, neither way is proper or best practice, but I think there's value to both sides. The value of letting attention rest in consciousness, in being, is that it tends to unload the polarities in consciousness that keep pulling attention like a magnet into this space. So by just resting there, those polarities soften more and more. This can take a long time, so this is not the only work to do with these polarities. I also recommend doing equanimity work, which is in my playlist on equanimity, doing shadow and emotion work, etc. And there's also value in direct investigation of the sense gates. You can do this one by one. You can look for where they cross over. And there are various other approaches that are all described in the non-dual playlist. This is also valuable practice as it teaches attention to rest in the actual instead of the reflected. Even if that reflection of consciousness is only reflecting itself. At some point, realization will clarify enough that we start to directly experience the non-dual nature of the actual world through the sense gates, but not as a reflection, not as a thought. So if you find that both of these methods make sense and you don't know which one to do, just trust yourself. You'll develop a sense of when one is more valuable than the other. Or you can do both at different times. Resting in unbound consciousness is often easier when meditating, especially at first. Whereas work in the sense fields, you can really do anytime. But that's also valuable to do while you're meditating. So you can do some meditative practice with the sense fields, some with consciousness, and some with inquiry as well. It's really up to you to figure out the right mixture for yourself. But I would suggest picking one and sticking to it through a period of practice, whether it's 20 minutes or half an hour or for a day. Now there's a subtle nuance I want to point out, and that is when your attention is in the being space, the pure sense of knowingness, consciousness, when attention starts to drift into the senses, there's a distinction between that happening very spontaneously and naturally, and when there's some reflection going on that causes us to be aware of that shift and stand apart from it. This can happen almost without any thought at all, but the subtle thought of awareness of may arise. So you might notice if attention's moving to a sense gate from this pure beingness, that there's a label or an image in the mind that's reflecting that. And you can recognize that too as a simple thought. So the label of a vivid sense is a thought, whereas the vivid sense is pure non-dual. So again, this isn't a cognitive teaching. It's something you'll discern when you practice this way over time. So when attention is remaining in the thought space, the conscious space, just notice that even the knowing of a sensation or a sound is itself also a thought, and that will immediately lead you right back into consciousness. When attention is, in a sense, such a sound, fully in sound, then there's no reflection of that. There's no awareness of that apart from the sound. There's just the sound. There's no perception of the sound. There's just the sound. There's no knowing of the sound. There's just the sound. So this seeming muddy area between thought or consciousness and sensation is a good place to investigate and practice. And you do this by clarifying the practice from the beginning and staying with it. Noticing that the awareness of a sensation is not the same as a pure sensation. The awareness of a sound is not the same as a sound. When you put your attention fully into sound, that's all there is. There's nothing aware of it. There's just sound, hearing, and so forth. So the non-dual playlist clarifies this through many videos. Hopefully this is helpful, but again, if it seems too technical or nuanced and you're not finding it in your experience, just move on and come back to it at some time in the future.